Welcome back to Heads and Tails. This is my first recording of 2024, and it's a real honour and a privilege to have Oli De Botton with me. Oli is, for those who don't know, I'd be surprised if you don't, but Oli's the CEO of the Careers and Enterprise Company. That's our national body for careers education. If I go further back, he was the head teacher and co-founder of the infamous School 21, which pioneered new ways of working with employers, including the introduction of extended work placements for all year 10s and year 12s. He co-founded the national charity subsequent to that, Voice 21, which works with schools to promote and develop communication skills for young people, something really at the heart of everything we love at Opperton. Oli was also one of the first cohort of Teach First teachers in 2003, a fascinating period of educational history I'm interested to ask you about, and has extensive teaching experience in all sorts of roles in schools. He's worked in education policy and strategy now for many years as a government education advisor. Now, I'm going to quote Oli because he once said one important thing that he learned about inspiring young people about the world of work, or I think the most important thing, perhaps he said, when you give young people high quality experiences, they rise to the challenge, they grow in confidence, and they find their voice. And I'm really excited to dig into that philosophy more today. So Oli, thank you so much for sharing the time you have to give us today. Thank you.
It's slightly overwhelming, but thank you for the introduction and great to be here.
Overwhelming is good. Well, we'll go really simple. We'll go way back. We're big on all things mentoring. Who was your mentor? What's your perspective on mentorship, I guess?
Well, I think I've got two mentors, really. I suppose, firstly, my colleague Peter Hyman, who I co-founded School 21 with and Voice 21. And I'm not sure he was a mentor in the traditional sense, but he had these, and still has these incredible qualities, which I think have really helped me, and I think they've helped many others. And if I could summarize them, and I hope he wouldn't mind me saying this, he refuses to accept conventional wisdom on pretty much anything, which can be challenging, but is absolutely critical when you're thinking about supporting young people, because conventional wisdom, if we take the longer view, is something that keeps people in their lane and makes sure that the institutions remain inert rather than dynamic. And so that sort of philosophy that sort of fused through everything, particularly the early stage of School 21 and Voice 21, I think I've carried with me. It's trying to not accept what's been told to you if you don't think, or the evidence doesn't suggest it's in the best interests of young people. So I sort of learned that. The second thing is the kind of sense that vision, ideas matter. And matter as much as process and people leadership. And I think it's hard, isn't it? Because no institution, no system can work beyond the support of the people within it. But equally, it's ideas, I think, that take us out of our comfort zone, that make us think big, that make us imagine something better. And I think his sort of steadfast commitment to ideas and vision, I think I've really taken. And the third thing I'd say is there's a real kindness to him and to the support he gave to me and others. So I'd say Peter be one. Another one I've got, in a way, his name's Howard. He's a former head teacher, been head teacher for many years. You might, I don't know if you'd like me saying this, a kind of wise old bird. I don't know if that's a sort of probably not the right phrase, but you know what I mean? A wise leader who ran two massive schools in challenging circumstances. And he's come to the end of his period, and I work with him intensively, particularly as a head, and still do today. And what he brings, which I think is sort of extraordinary, is after all those many years in education, still a passion for the centrality of working with children in the classroom day in, day out, this sense of public service being an end in itself. And actually his commitment, like Peter, to innovation, in the sense that if you've seen the system for long enough, you kind of accept that ideas have come and gone, and that the quest for better, the quest for improvement remains undimmed in him, and kind of really it inspires me. And then the other point is that he's sort of so good at all the sort of practical elements of leadership. What do you do about that difficult situation? How do you manage that? Because he's seen it 3 or 4 times over, and gives younger leaders, like I was, and I don't know if I still am, but feel young, the kind of confidence to manage those. So I'd say those two people have mentored me over the years.
A super eloquent start. We're off to a flyer. Thank you. There's so much there to unpack, which I think I'm going to have to dig back into later. But I want to go one step further back. What was Oli like at school? Maybe an anecdote from your time as a student in the system.
I mean, let's be honest, I like learning. So, I liked school. I wasn't one of the people who thought it was sort of boring. I liked the learning aspect. But I suppose one anecdote is I guess I've always been an activist, I suppose. Probably that's a bit annoying, isn't it, for teachers? But I kind of had a sort of burning sense of what was wrong with the world, which must have been a complete nightmare. And it's sort of probably remained undimmed. But an example of this is when I was in year 6, I think it was. And this is showing my age. It was the exact time that Sky TV came along and I don't know if people remember this, took the rights for domestic football from ITV or BBC onto Sky. And I thought it was an outrage, partly because we didn't have Sky and it was expensive or whatever. But also I kind of had this sense that football, sport, etc. was for everyone. So I took it upon myself to write to my local MP, just sort of randomly. And unfortunately, it was Margaret Thatcher. It was her constituency, and I would like to have sort of confronted her with with that and privatisation, etc. But I didn't. It was her successor, kind of lesser known Hartley Booth. And I wrote this letter, and he invited me in, and we had tea, and the sort of local Gazette featured it. It was an assembly, and sort of 40 years on, of course, the BBC and ITV have got full rights. But no, I mean, it didn't make any difference whatsoever. But I sort of thought, I don't know, I was sort of being precocious and annoying, but it made me think that, and I still think this, that and I didn't engage, I wasn't placards, I didn't sort of try and barricade the office, but I thought, well, I'm going to make this point. And I don't know, it spoke, I guess, about sort of annoying child I was, but I think more broadly says, kids having opinions and having a voice, I think is fine and good and supportive.
I think it put you in pretty good stead probably for the rest of your life. So, and I'm sure plenty of us agree with you on the football. I certainly do. Toughest moment in your career? It's been long and varied already, but toughest must have been some difficult moments.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly difficult, and I've only ever worked in schools serving communities that are underserved by others. So you lots of kind of social problems often come in. As I had sick, we had very, very challenging situations. But I suppose by far the most was kind of being ahead at the beginning and during COVID. It was. It went through phases of it. There was an initial burst of energy and commitment, but having the longevity to carry on. And it was a number of factors. I mean, one day we were there looking at the news, thinking about, thinking about, there's this sort of strange thing happening across the world. The next day, the local health authorities are writing to you to make sure that you check whether parents have been to Wuhan. On the next day, anyone who'd been anywhere, and the next day, anyone, and by sort of 3 or 4 days quickly, you'd shut down the school. And just the anxiety from a leadership perspective of that, holding the anxiety of staff in a kind of context of kind of low information, low certainty. At the same time, my wife was newly pregnant and we were worried about that, and the community we were serving, and we later discovered there were disproportionate impacts for certain communities across the country related to ethnicity and poverty and multiple occupancy households. Trying to hold all of that as a leader, as a leadership team, as a community was really incredibly challenging. And I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing aftershocks in the system about that, because it's incredibly traumatic for everyone involved. And then I guess there was the sort of very practical elements to it, which were terrible, but I think sparked, certainly in our case, the school kind of real togetherness that I think we did draw strength from. But it was challenging. Decisions to open the school, for example, were heavily contested externally, internally, local schools, local authorities. Decisions around what when you open the school for disadvantaged children, what that meant. Decisions around what safe meant. I mean, it was sort of broadly a really challenging moment. And I look back and I think, have any leaders, and particularly the leaders still leading schools in the system, I have just huge admiration for, because I, have had the time to process all of that and kind of work out what it all meant and how they do it. Very much the school is like you carry on, next day, open the school, everyone's happy. But I think I think it's a pause, a reflection. I think it would be good for all of us to kind of reflect on what we learn and how we can come out stronger.
You just look back on that and think there was no playbook. Absolutely no playbook for that. And really complicated. But the more positive, a highlight. What's been the peak so far? When have you felt a real rush to the head?
I don't think it's really my character to do that. I'm a bit of on to the next thing. I suppose one of the things that I think someone said to me, I think when I took this particular job for careers education, I think my mum sort of said, "What, are you mad? You're taking on careers advice. Everyone thinks careers advice is terrible. Everyone's got a story about, when they went to the library and someone told them, something they didn't want to be." Or, of course, it isn't like that. And there's some extraordinary schools and colleges doing brilliant work. But I suppose it's this sense, and I guess it's similar for School 21. People were saying at the time, look, you can't, a broad, rich education, that's not quite the right model. The model is a narrower one, something that, is very, very academically focused. And I suppose in both those two examples, I think certainly fits and starts, and definitely in the careers education space, we're able to show, well, actually, you can do these things well. It is possible to reimagine a way of doing careers education that I think is powerful and impactful. And so a highlight recently from the careers side was the OECD, which everyone looks at, the PISA results, had a look at careers, and they said, well, actually, careers education in England is good and is better than most internationals, which I don't think, I'm not sure anyone believes that, but it's there's evidence. So that sort of gives me kind of confidence and pride in what people have done. And then from the School 21 side, in the early days, we got really good Ofsted and got good results, and that it's possible. It's not impossible, but it takes huge effort and reflection and humility about what are and aren't right about those things. But I suppose from a personal perspective, I enjoy the moments where you can show progress and impact.
I feel like there's those odd moments, aren't there, where other people are looking in and they all think it's wonderful, and you're like, oh wow, is it? Maybe it is one. Maybe it's going well. But for most of the time, it just definitely doesn't feel like that, does it? Your line about quest for better earlier, you must have quoted that to your mum. Mum, I'm just on a hunt for the quest for better. On to a bit of content. It could be a book, it could be a film, it could be a podcast, some kind of content that you'd recommend to like-minded or educationally minded people. It doesn't have to be education based.
Well, I think a couple of things. I suppose first, I always think that it's good to have a hinterland when you're a leader, in the sense that it's so all-encompassing, particularly in education, that having kind of other interests is not tangential. In fact, it's really important, and both gives you a kind of confidence and a well of kind of context and distance to engage further in that, in your kind of main hustle versus your side hustle again. And I suppose I feel generally in the world, I think it's a very anxiety-inducing context for people in education more broadly. And the world has changed. There's conflict, there's difficult issues to deal with, and for young people, you see that. I see it with my own son, who already there's kind of pressure around how you are online, how you deal with how other issues bleed into the classroom. So I think that's difficult, and it's difficult for public sector leaders and for school leaders who are sort of the front line of all these issues. So my sort of advice is sort of take the long view. So I listen to a podcast called These Times, which is a very esoteric podcast. It's a brilliant presenters, Tom McTay and Helen Thompson, and they take an issue. So the most recent episode was this. There's this issue in the Red Sea and all the ships, and they start the discussion of that sort of in the 1900s, and it's like, okay, that it just gives you a sort of a space to think, okay, what's happening in the world today? There's context to it, and things may like this have happened before, and things may happen in the future, and humans and communities survived and thrived within that. So I think when I think about the things that I consume, the media I consume outside of kind of education, it's always to try and give me the long view, because I think that sort of calms and centers me as best I can.
That's lovely. It sort of reminds me in a funny sort of way of Some of the Rest is Politics, where they go into his history as part of it, or The Rest is History actually as well. So some of those ones that can really adequately connect up problems we're solving now with the context they have. I totally agree with you on that. I think it's great. Okay, how about, I'm sure you have to stand and give opinions all the time. What do you think your most unpopular or perhaps controversial opinion is?
Well, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but based on my previous answer, I think the subject of history, and obviously School 21 is about the future, but I think history is a subject that has extraordinary explanatory power for the modern world, and thinking like a historian is a great way of interrogating the world. If you think about the sources, historic GCSE history, if you did that with your X feed or your Instagram, whatever, I think it would be helpful. So that's a sort of, I don't know whether that's compulsory history. I'm not suggesting that, but I think that might be interesting. I suppose two controversial points. One is, and I say this really carefully. So of course, learning styles as a concept's been debunked. Everyone knows it. Not everyone has. You've got to, you don't teach to kinesthetic learners. I understand that, and I agree with that. But however, and young people are animated by different things. I think it's hard to argue against that. Some young people will thrive in some contexts, and others will thrive in others. And when I zoom out, it makes me think that the purpose of education is to find the context that young people can thrive. And if that means more variety, I think that's good. So in other words, it's not about tailoring your English or history lesson to the different learning needs of young people, but at the macro level, variety, high quality interaction in different contexts, I think is good for young people. And so a broad and bold, ambitious and porous education system, well done, carefully supported and funded, I think is a good thing.
Do you think
is that controversial? I don't know.
Well,
possibly.
That was my question. Is that variety? Do you think that's controversial? I mean, I happen to agree with you, but maybe some people don't. Do you think there's been too much of a focus by some in pedagogy for like a focus on uniformity, or something that can be blanket approved that works for everyone?
I think it's so hard because teaching, schools are a public service, so you need it to be efficient and effective, and you need to pick priorities. I totally understand that. So it's not a criticism of that per se, but I think we need to have an acceptance of the messiness of growing up and childhood and learning. And so it's sort of, you need to have a system that is sort of structured and clear enough that helps us understand that, children are learning things we need them to learn, but a kind of ambition that giving young people, as I sort of said at the beginning, high quality, experiences away from traditional context is, if done well, would be additive, and it wouldn't, and shouldn't overwhelm the system.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely point. Okay, great. Someone who's developing in the sector or a career in the sector, they might be a teacher, they might just be thinking about working in schools or going down this kind of line of work and line of career. Do you have any real fervent, strong advice for them based on your time, or what's your best piece of advice?
I don't know.
It's a miserable question. I mean, it's got 500 answers.
I don't know whether, again, I think it's always important for leaders to kind of reflect that a lot of success is chance and all of that kind of stuff. And that I always think that you've got to think, why am I doing? If I was in a different role, would I still think the things that I think? So broadly, what I'm saying is that content, having a sense of vision and ideas, is the thing that stands you in good stead, because things change, organizations rise and fall, and leadership positions come and go. And what stays with you, your career, is a commitment to the things that you believe in. And so having those things, accepting challenge on those things, refining those things, having an argument that you're seeking to make. I'm not saying I do this particularly well. I think helps you stand out. And a kind of porosity to ideas and the people that bring them, I think is a sort of wonderful quality in any professional, but particularly in education where there are lots of ideas. I think that helps you stand out. Now, stand out doesn't necessarily mean running big things or being a head teacher or doing all those things, because that might not be the thing that animates you. But having an argument and having a commitment and an interest in ideas, I think, I think is the thing that I would advise people. Whether I don't know whether they should listen to me or not, but that's what I would say.
I think it wraps up nicely, this, because actually it's like, how do we find ways within the system for young people to give them that scope for vision and ideas, and to allow them to be that person you've just advised anyone to want to become, not just if they're an educationalist, but also, how do we stand out as individuals through our experiences through education? I think it's a nice place to finish. So thank you very much. You shared lots of lovely things in a typically eloquent way. Really appreciate you sharing the time, Oli. So thank you.
Thanks, Henry.